ABC's Manuel Madrano is at the Supreme Court.
Justice Stevens said Congress could act to allow for medical marijuana use. She will be one of the 9 justices sitting.
Please help me welcome Manny Madrano.
Character is an attribute that I've been very fortunate to have been introduced to from a very young age. I take a huge cut in pay and I become a federal prosecutor and assistant United States attorney. And there the drug dealers proceeded to torture Enrique Camarena for about 36 hours nonstop. And he says, Manny, I've got bad news. We've learned there's a contract out on your life. There was this one fellow I convicted who walks into a Bank of America, robs a bank. By the time he gets home, LAPD is waiting for him because, you see, he left his wallet on the counter. You need to teach your kids to have the courage to try something and to fail. This is the impact that you have on your kids every day. You make a difference. My friends, as a network correspondent for ABC News based out of Washington, D.C., it is my privilege, it's my honor to cover the United States Supreme Court. And I deem it a privilege and an honor because of what the High Court represents for me. And what it stands for, simply stated, is character. Think about it. These 9 men and women Supreme Court justices appointed for life by the President of the United States, it is their job, it is their function to define the laws, to interpret this magnificent document called the United States Constitution, and in so doing, they define the rights of every man, woman, and child in this great country of ours. And I don't know about you, but for me, that takes character. Character is an attribute that I've been very fortunate to have been introduced to from a very young age, thanks largely in part to a woman. Her name is Elisa. Elisa's 74 years old. She's originally from Chihuahua, Mexico. She resides in the Southwest, and she's my mother. And many years ago, with a 6th grade education, she leaves Mexico and carrying my older sister Maria in her arms, she crosses the raging waters of the Rio Grande, settles in West Texas, becomes a U.S. citizen, marries my father. They have 4 kids. When I was 7, my folks divorced, and although I was raised by my mother, I saw a lot of my dad. And when I was growing up in the Southwest, we were always below the poverty line, always seemingly just a step ahead of the bill collectors. I remember one time, just for the heck of it, I sat down and figured out that like in 13 years in West Texas, I lived in 12 different apartments or barrios or slums, more accurately. We moved around so much, I grew up thinking I was a child of a diplomat. I grew up in El Paso, Texas. By show of hands, anyone here from El Paso? You rock! El Paso, a good place to grow up. Family, very important for me. I have to take just a quick moment to tell you about one of my favorite relatives there. This was my Aunt Lola. My tia Lola, God bless her, she's gone now. This was my mother's older sister. And I would usually run into my tia Lola at family functions. I remember one time I'm home in El Paso visiting from college, and I'm single, by the way, at the time. Something about which my Aunt Lola always gave me a hard time about. Anyway, I run into her at a wedding. She comes up to me at the reception. She pokes me in the ribs and she cackles. Manuelito, you're next. And she laughed like it was the funniest thing she ever heard. A few months later, same thing happens. I run into my tia Lola at another wedding. She comes up to me and she pokes me and she says, Manny, you're next. Well, after a while, it started getting kind of old, but I finally got her to stop. I started telling her the same thing at funerals. After I graduate from Thomas Jefferson High School in El Paso, Texas, I'm now on a plane and on my way to Harvard University. And this was an experience because, you see, I'd never been out of the Southwest. I'd never been on an airplane. I remember mid-flight, the flight attendant comes by and says, would you like a Coca-Cola? And I'm such a turnip, I've never flown. I go, well, how much does it cost? And she says, oh, soft drinks are free. And I go, oh? Free? Never use the word free around an 18-year-old Chicano fresh off the boat. So I say, bring them on, baby. So I start knocking down these Coca-Colas. Then the flight attendant comes by with these little bags of nuts. And folks, I'm not talking about these puny bags you get on today's Spartan flights. I'm talking about back then in the 70s, man, a veritable cornucopia of fancy nuts. Pecans, cashews, macadamia nuts. Did you know I'd never seen a macadamia nut before in my entire life? So before you know it, I've drank about a gallon of Coca-Cola, eaten about a pound of these fancy nuts. My plane is descending into Logan Airport in Boston, Massachusetts. I turn to the businessman on my right, I smile, and I throw up on his lap. I arrive at Harvard Yard. I need a job. I get the highest paying job I can get, $3.25 an hour dorm crew. That means I have the privilege of cleaning the bathrooms for upperclassmen at Harvard College. And honestly, I got a lot of razzing from my white, preppy classmates at Harvard because I was cleaning toilets. But you know what? I didn't care because, well, I needed the money for books and tuition. But I realized intuitively, even then at that young age, that there's dignity in any work as long as you give 110%. And there's another thing I understood as well. Even then at that very young age, I knew that this toilet cleaning job, for me, it was just a way station on my way to my ultimate dream or goal, which was to become a trial attorney. But when I was at Harvard, I kept my eyes open. And I observed for the first time in my life power and wealth and status, and I realized that I wanted a piece of that pie because, let's be honest, poverty is a great motivator. So I figured to get my piece of the pie, I would have to emulate a select few of my classmates. So for the next 4 years at Harvard College, I basically turned into a jerk. So obnoxious, so offensive, thought I knew it all. Then I started Harvard Law School. That was brutal. 50% divorce rate at my graduating class at the Harvard Law School. In first year of law school, you do moot court competition, so I'm matched up against this young guy from South Carolina, easygoing demeanor, casual attire, thick Southern accent. I am embarrassed to share with you that behind his back I used to make fun of this guy because I'm thinking that based on appearances alone, I'm going to demolish this guy. Then the competition begins. And I get my opponent's legal brief, and it was the most beautifully written document I'd ever read. Then my opponent stands up right here to give his oral argument. He proceeds to give the most elegant, lucid, cogent argument I'd ever heard. And I'm thinking, this guy is just 21 years old. Well, needless to say, my opponent crushed me in that moot court competition. But I took away a powerful lesson because I realized for the first time that I really didn't know what success was. Oh, I thought I did. I thought success was how much money am I going to make, what kind of car am I going to drive, and I thought to achieve success had to have an attitude, had to be pompous and arrogant and pretentious. But now I realize for the first time that truly successful people in life, I think, have the confidence, the clarity of mind to be subtle and unpretentious and kind and generous. And I vowed from that day forward, that I would endeavor to emulate my young friend from South Carolina. And there's another reason I share this story with you, because it was, for me, my first exposure to my own prejudices, my own stereotypes, and the lack of appreciation of the power and vitality of diversity. When I looked at my friend from South Carolina, and I'm ashamed to tell you this, but I'm going to tell you anyway, I saw a hick from the South with a Southern drawl. I thought I was going to kill him because he didn't fit my mind's eye of what a trial lawyer was supposed to look like. And thank goodness he kicked my butt, because that's when I realized for the first time that great lawyers, great professionals in any field can come from all walks of life, from all forms of diverse backgrounds. I mentioned I grew up in El Paso, Texas. I love El Paso. But with the benefit of hindsight, I realize now that back then when I grew up in the 50s, 60s, early 70s, the city was de facto segregated. If you've ever been to El Paso, it's at the western tip of the state of Texas. The Rio Grande River snakes through that neck of the woods. South of the river is Mexico. To the north of the river is El Paso, Texas. And then the city is divided by a mountain range called the Franklin Mountains that runs north and south. On the west side of the mountain is where all the whites live. On the east side of the mountain is where all the Mexican kids lived. That's where I lived. And I'm thinking, how did I get here? Why was I able to get here? And I'll tell you why. I'll give you a good example of that. Mr. Milan Swambera. Mr. Swimbera was my orchestra teacher in junior high and high school in El Paso. This is a guy who was a fabulous violist, a fabulous violinist. This is a guy who immigrated from Czechoslovakia, settled in El Paso, and year after year produced the finest high school orchestra in the state of Texas, a bunch of poor Mexican kids. Every year he sent more kids to all-state competitions than any other high school in the state of Texas. Again, nothing but a group of Mexican kids. And this is a guy who could have taught at any white affluent school district in the state of Texas. He chose to stay in El Paso, and I love this man, and I hated him sometimes because he drove me so hard. Man, we butt heads all the time, but I understand why now. Because Mr. Swimbera, like many of you in this convention center today, would settle for nothing less than 100% of your best effort. And candidly, I would not be here today but for the kindness and generosity of people like Mr. Milan Swimbera. After I graduate from the Harvard Law School, I'm now on a plane again. This time I'm on my way to Los Angeles, California. I joined a big law firm in Beverly Hills. I'm working hard, making money, life is good. But after 2 years, I realized I had to leave. And the reason was I wasn't getting to try cases. So much to my father's chagrin, I take a huge cut in pay and I become a federal prosecutor and assistant United States attorney. And can I tell you something? And how many of us in this room have felt this way when we embark on a new chapter in our personal and professional endeavors? I was so scared. Because what if I wasn't good enough? What if I couldn't cut it as a trial lawyer? When you're a federal prosecutor in Los Angeles for your first trials, you cut your teeth on bank robbery cases. You may not know this. LA, bank robbery capital of the world. 1 year alone, there was over 2,600 bank robberies in Southern California. And the thing about bank robbers in Southern California, they are not the sharpest tools in the shed. There was this one fellow I convicted who walks into a Bank of America, robs a bank. By the time he gets home, LAPD is waiting for him because, you see, he left his wallet on the counter. And there was another fellow I convicted who walks into another B of A, this time in South Central Los Angeles, puts a gun to the face of an 8.5-month pregnant teller. She has the presence of mind to give him bait money in this thing called a die pack. And man, these things are so cool because the way they work is they explode or detonate electronically when taken outside the perimeter of the bank, and they spew this indelible dye all over the place. It's an incredible mess. Anyway, the bank robber flees. Outside you hear this loud kaboom! LAPD arrives to find this bank robber writhing on the ground in agony. Well, it turns out that bank robber, before he fled, he took that die pack and shoved it down the front of his pants. What a knucklehead.